Welcome to The Beat. Tonight we begin with news out of the Trump DOJ, which undercuts the entire department's credibility on the rule of law. A line crossed. Tonight we can report the federal executive branch is charging a federal legislative branch member. That alone is a first in this already sometimes chaotic Trump term. And the charges themselves are very unusual. Indeed, according to precedent, they are flimsier than what would usually initiate any federal case. And so before I go any further, that's probably the most important context. We'll show you all the facts and details, but the Trump administration, which is led by a president who promised and vowed political retribution, is going after multiple people in the opposition party. Nothing normal about it, a line crossed, and the evidence, for the most part, and we'll get into it, cuts against the idea that this would be a valid or normal charge. The New York Times account of the underlying incident puts it simply. The Trump DOJ's case turns on claims that have already been contradicted by video footage and by witnesses who were at the scene. Now, that is a journalistic account. It's from the New York Times. They are not trying to play ball for one side or the other. If you check the Times account of, say, other cases that might involve members of either party, say, one of the recent Democratic members of Congress who faced corruption charges and was later convicted, Bob Menendez, you didn't have that kind of really clear rebuttal of the underlying case. And that's important because part of the game here is trying to create mud or confusion in the perspective of what happened so that you don't really know whether this is a political case. And a lot of legal experts, the ACLU today says this is an improper partisan political case. Now, more broadly, we know what Trump campaigned on. A lot of times when you deal with allegations of government abuse of power, the person at the top denies it completely, and then you have to go into their mindset and, with evidence, determine whether there is malicious intent. In this instance, overall, not this specific member of Congress charged, and we'll get into the details, but overall, I would remind you, as a matter of fact, that the current president has already admitted to the goal of abusing power, to target opponents and Democrats, to go after people, to intimidate. So that's a context for the Justice Department's efforts to charge, try, and potentially jail a federal lawmaker who's in the co-equal branch of government that, of course, oversees the DOJ and DHS and ICE. Co-equal. So we're dealing with the line cross in a very big way tonight. And a week ago or a month ago, you wouldn't see reporting that this line was crossed because they hadn't gone after members of Congress this way. Now, the incident happened at that ICE facility. You may recall headlines about it, which matters because the federal officials there, while they're not immune from anything ever they might do, they are in the heart of their federal duties because they have a legal role in overseeing ICE and detention facilities in general. That's why they hold hearings. That's why they sometimes do site visits and tours and subpoenas and gather evidence. And so this ultimately tonight is a troubling case for the separation of powers and the way our government works. The DOJ charging this Congresswoman, LaMonica McIver, for what they claim is an assault on federal agents in that situation at the ICE facility. There was a clash at this Newark facility. The DOJ under Trump is claiming that she did forcibly assault, resist, oppose, impede, intimidate, and interfere with agents, that she was some sort of physical menace against the trained, armed group of ICE agents there. These charges were announced in a very dramatic way by someone who first and foremost rose to prominence as Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Alina Habba. But she announced them because she is now, in that state of New Jersey, the interim U.S. attorney. That's the top federal prosecutor in her district. Journalists identifying that it was a fairly new and inexperienced aide who helped set up these charges and had begun working for Habba just this month. That matters because there are a bunch of career, nonpartisan folks who do this kind of work. So if they had initiated the charge, which is the normal process, that would be less suspicious than having all these political people who are directly tied to the president. As for the Congresswoman, her team says she got the charging document this morning, meaning the effort to get the news out or the online tweets out came first because it was about 12 or so hours after the announcement that she, a member of Congress and now a federal defendant, was actually appraised of her rights and the charges. She's also said, so this is according to her, that there was an offer of some kind of plea deal, and she's rejecting that. The first hearing will be tomorrow morning, as she's explaining.
Representative, can we talk to you about the charges brought against you?
Well, it's political intimidation, and I'm looking forward to my day in court.
Political intimidation. Now, if you want to be more skeptical, you have plenty of cases that involve politics, and you hear a lot about the politicians, whoever they may be, saying it's because they're in politics that they're in any scrutiny at all. But there is other pieces of evidence here. The Washington Post reporting how this is a highly unusual action by DOJ to charge a sitting member of Congress in an incident where no one was injured. And that matters again because you look at this and you say, there's a line crossed. This isn't about allegations of corruption or personal conduct or some other activities, which of course nobody, because of a political job or any other reason, should be above the law. We've heard that said many times. But this isn't out there in those kind of ways. This is over here in the heart of her duties, in an incident where no one was actually injured, but where the DOJ under Trump now wants to say this was about an assault, a battery, a hurting of other individuals. And so while there can be valid prosecutions of people who happen to be in the opposing party, I mentioned one, Senator Menendez before, this is beyond suspicious. And it comes amidst a wider effort. So at a certain point, while everyone who cares about fairness and facts doesn't want to assume too much, at a certain point, this isn't the story of one skirmish or one lawmaker. It is the escalating story of how the Trump administration, after Trump promised to do it, appears to be doing what he vowed: political retribution, abusing federal power to go after people with the express intent of scaring them or shutting them up. A lot of experts and other elected officials speaking out along those lines.
This is not typical to charge a member of Congress, and neither is the way the Justice Department rolled it out.
Very rare to file charges against a sitting member of Congress.
This is not about even what happened there. It's about a fight in this country about due process.
It's complete political theater.
This is a classic example of the administration, the executive branch, weaponizing government.
That's some of the new criticism. Now, as I told you, with that context in mind, we can look at the underlying incident, which DOJ wants to treat under Trump as some kind of deliberate, premeditated assault, and which many other accounts are skeptical of. The Congresswoman was with other lawmakers, both federal and local, visiting the facility. There was a kind of a scrum or a conflict that broke out. ICE agents moved to make an arrest that they have now completely dropped of the local mayor of Newark. And McIver and others are basically seen in what was an unexpected situation, scuffling or surrounding, and you can use any word you want, you can see it for yourself there, in what was clearly an unexpected, chaotic situation because the federal officials have a role in overseeing the very place that they're at, and now the federal agents seem to be clashing with them. Now, in a back and forth clash, reasonable people, reasonable jurors can debate who's pushing who and who's reacting or who's out of control. There's also footage that was posted on social media that shows McIver asking officers basically stop touching us. Again, if this were a congressional hearing, some of the same federal agents would have the duty of keeping security and protecting the members of Congress. Here it became kind of, as you see, a pretty tense grouping of people, and she's talking there. Now, the other mayor, who was also quoted in the montage I just played for you, matters a lot in this because there was a case, you may have heard about it, you follow the news, that the feds brought, which is a lesser charge, a very, what lawyers call a ticky-tack or kind of silly charge of the mayor trespassing. Again, that's unusual. It could happen, right, if he ran into someone's home. But usually when you're the mayor and you go to a government facility in public, you know, with your aides in a formal way, you don't usually get a federal trespassing charge. And that's what the DOJ initially tried against Newark Mayor Ras Baraka. That case fell apart. If that was their big opening gambit against a Democrat, it already completely collapsed because the DOJ has dropped those charges. And if you're thinking, wow, there's so much going on, how do you keep track? Well, that's new. If it sounds new, it is new. That was just last night. Flimsy charges, as the New York Times reported. Baraka was actually initially allowed past the fence. That's kind of the opposite of trespassing. then, quote, invited past the gates before he was arrested, seemingly contradicting the accusations that came more from Trump DOJ that he had, quote, barged into the facility without permission. He was then asked to leave multiple times and exited voluntarily. Federal agents wearing face coverings and military fatigues appeared outside the gates to arrest the mayor. Again, this is not normal, and you don't have to have a political side to look at this in America and say, it's getting hot in here. This sounds like a charade, and even the Trump DOJ just dropped these charges last night. I can show you the video, which we've had of Baraka's arrest, and based on what he said he went through that day, he also looks back at this incident where they've basically, in a span of a day, dropped him out, but substituted in another Democrat. Here's his views about the new charges against that lawmaker.
I didn't see any of the things that were stated. I didn't see any of those things happen. So I think that the Congresswoman will be vindicated. Elected officials are being targeted in this country. And, unfortunately, the people there were being targeted.
Targeting elected officials, abusing power. I told you the line is crossed because there was a lot of questions about what did Trump mean and how far would he go and how would everyone respond when we got there. We are there. I cannot tell you what a judge or jury will do in the long term with the lawmaker's case. She is presumed innocent. The evidence is weak, but it's possible that the case could go forward, and we'll cover all the evidence. But I can tell you that in the other almost brand new case against the mayor, it already fell apart. Charges dropped, which is a further sign that the Trump DOJ is going after Democrats, whether or not, in the case of the mayor, the evidence supports it. And you don't have to take anyone's outside view of the evidence. You can just look at the DOJ quickly backing down and dropping the very controversial case they brought. The wider context is a heck of a lot of investigative activities against Trump's critics or people he perceives as opponents. That includes this Democratic Congresswoman and the mayor, the New Jersey governor, Phil Murphy, who's been in a clash with, again, some of those same hardline prosecutors about whether immigration could form a pretext or a foundation to legally go after him and his attorney general. New York Attorney General Letitia James, facing investigative scrutiny. She, of course, clashed with Trump many times. Chris Krebs, James Comey, who was talking to our own Nicole Wallace in a newsworthy interview just yesterday about the far-fetched claims that the longtime FBI veteran posted a picture of seashells as an effort to foment political violence against the president. In each of these cases, you can go through it and you can go through the evidence, or you can say it seems flimsy. The whole point is all the faces you see on your screen are people that have opposed the power of this administration, and they are facing the kind of intimidation tactics, investigations, and harassment that may dissuade or quiet others. Democratic Congressman Swalwell said this today.
If you want to just break down the facts, they let her in the facility after there was an arrest of the mayor. So if she was so violent, if she was such a threat, why did they let her in? I mean, that's why this is such nonsense. But she will not be the last person they seek to indict. And that's what must concern all of us.
Not the last person. That's his claim, his prediction. Now, he is in the opposition party and he's clashed with Trump and he's talking about the future. So we don't know what will happen in the future, but that is the environment. Top Democrats, experienced and serious people saying the line is crossed, we have a problem. The ACLU, nonpartisan, calling this an autocratic and clearly political type of crackdown. And then if you want to talk about the footage where you say things did look a little out of control and not like the ideal government oversight, that's fair. People can criticize all sorts of ways that politicians in both parties exercise their duties. But legal experts do not see this as a traditional or fair-minded prosecution. And we've seen members of both parties do all kinds of things that sometimes get unwieldy in their political politicking and oversight. Even when those actions were terminated in one case, for example, a Republican riot, the Brooks Brothers riot around election debates, or Republican operatives were basically storming the place. You could call that local trespassing, arguing that ballots should be treated differently. That's on the Republican side. Or you had MTG and Matt Gaetz, who showed up very aggressively at a federal prison where they wanted to make a point about January 6th. Again, you could criticize that, and some people said there were aspects of it that were in poor taste or misleading, but You don't typically have, under administrations in both parties previously, arrests made even for these kind of raucous events. In 2020, Democrats said they wanted to do a kind of a sit-in and kneel in parts of the Capitol. And again, people can like or dislike the image on the screen, but we aren't a country that deals with that kind of political activity by rounding up lawmakers and threatening them with jail time. That's why we're witnessing this major departure. There is a high burden of proof when you deal in these kind of situations. The line is crossed. All of the hypotheticals about what will we do as a country if we get to this point under Trump, we're here now. One of the cases already fell apart. That tells you something about the power of evidence, videos, facts. The mayor's case, gone, but replaced quite quickly, quite suspiciously, to be frank, by a DOJ that seems hell-bent on moving forward on these kind of unusual cases against sitting officials. We have two special guests. We're back on this important discussion in 90 seconds.
This is a classic example of the administration, the executive branch, weaponizing government.
A line crossed in the DOJ indictment of a Democratic official, a lawmaker today. I'm joined by Professor Jason Johnson. I walked through the facts and the wider pattern here. What do you see tonight?
What I see is just the continuation of the overreach of this new sort of authoritarian regime. The evidence, look, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. We've had this conversation before, but it doesn't appear that any real assault took place either from the Congresswoman against the members of ICE or the ICE members against her. Clearly, Alina Habba just wants to intimidate people. This is not the first, second, or fifth time we've seen this. We see the same thing happening right now with the judge Hannah Duggan in Milwaukee. This administration wants to frighten elected officials into not standing up against their overreaches of power. And this is just another example of it. I hope that this case falls apart just like the case against Ras Baraka, but I fear that they will simply start targeting people who perhaps are less high profile and have less resources and are less able to defend themselves against this kind of overreach.
Yeah, and it tells you something that they've tried to offer pleas and had these backroom deals, which is how they went at law firms. Different example, there weren't criminal charges pending there, but right. They like to see if anyone will play ball for any number of reasons. And as you mentioned, these are real humans. Not everyone wants to become the public face of this. Didn't choose it, may not have the resources, may have family or other reasons. Not everyone's in the same level of strength, to be frank. What does it tell you that the mayor was in court? Could imagine someone in his life going, hey, there's a lot of stuff. Do you have to be this guy? Could you take a plea and move aside? What does it tell you that he stood firm and very quickly found the case fell apart and they dropped it?
Well, I think what it shows is two things. One, strength of his convictions, right? The mayor's like, look, I know this is garbage. I'm going to stand for it. And two, and I want to say this because I think it's really important when you looked at elected officials doing something that creates sort of chaos or frustration one way or another. There are times when activists or elected officials actually want to get arrested. Right? They want to symbolically be arrested because they're trying to make a point. But that's not what's happening here. These are people who are just doing their jobs, and they're standing up for the fact that they're doing their jobs despite being arrested.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. And I showed very clearly members of both parties sometimes do these larger theatrics, right? That's very different than the federal government responding with all of the priorities it has and saying, let's make a trespassing case out of this. If, for example, Congressman Gates had tiptoed past what was technically the line of how to visit a prison or not, we have never seen it dealt with this way, which adds to the evidence that this is political targeting. I want you to hang with me and make another point, because Trump DOJ officials have said this is about protecting the agents and officers. Take a listen.
We love you. You're very special. They were warriors, but they were really more than anything else. They're victims of what happened. They ought to release the J6 hostages. It will be my great honor to pardon the peaceful January 6 protesters.
169 of them have pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers.
Because they had no choice.
900 pleaded guilty to other crimes. They're also going to be eligible for a pardon from you?
Listen, it's a very tough system. We hope they come out tonight, frankly.
President Trump, we should remember, used his pardon power on day one for the most sweeping and controversial pardon of people ever convicted of crimes against the United States, including, as you saw there, a lot of attacks on police. Today, top DOJ officials and others working for Trump said this case against the lawmaker is all about showing that attacks on law enforcement won't be tolerated, separate from the fact pattern, which is, of course, now under debate in a federal case. What happened there, it is not something that most people can take seriously, given that the day one priority was not only to tolerate, but embrace people who attacked federal law enforcement. With that point in mind, we want to broaden the conversation and bring in the New York Times Magazine's Emily Bazelon. Jason is still with us. Emily, your thoughts tonight?
You know, prosecutors have enormous discretion, right? So you look at a case like this, you think, is this a good use of resources? Did somebody get hurt here? Was the protest out of control in some way that clearly violates the law? And I think we can see from the footage that the answers are no, and that this just seems like the people who were there, the mayor of Newark, this congresswoman, they were there trying to protest, trying to have some kind of oversight capacity at a nice facility.
To tour in their official capacity.
And ultimately, yes, the congresswoman was let in to tour. And you just really wonder about what the point of all of this is.
You wonder about it, or do you basically know? And we all are steeped in law and journalism here, so we try to be as fair as possible. But we'll put up the photos again where you have the pattern. So any individual case, for example, the case with the state judge, some people have said has more to it. The case against Comey, the classic seashells coded message of violence. Who among us hasn't seen people, use seashells in that way? I'm being dutifully sarcastic because I don't know how else to cover the seashell story. And Comey spoke out on that yesterday. And you add it all together, and it seems like a illicit pattern that ultimately a judge might toss some of these cases if it's proved to be selective prosecution.
Right. It does look like a pattern. Even when judges toss bad cases, when people are under investigation and have been indicted, that is a big deal in their lives. And certainly it can have a chilling effect on other folks. And so to think about, in this circumstance, arresting, charging a congresswoman from the opposing party who was going in some form of protest, those are all very sensitive matters, right? A president going in a president's Justice Department, and Trump does consider this to be his Justice Department. He has said that. The Justice Department going after someone in another branch from a rival political party who was trying to exercise oversight in the form of protests. Those are three things that we would never expect to see until now.
Yeah. Jason, take a listen to a little bit more of the mayor, because we've all heard about the so-called flood the zone strategy. If there wasn't so much else going on, and I don't know, I can't report why the timing went this way, but if there wasn't so much going on, the big story would just be that the huge case they trotted out fell on its face and collapsed, and they dropped it, right? But they within the hours of that last night, they got this other thing in. I point that out. People can make of it what they will, but here was the mayor.
Why do you think she dropped the charges against you?
Well, I think that was the right thing to do, for them to drop the charges. Obviously, we agreed to move forward, but ultimately I didn't do anything wrong. There was no charges that should be brought against me in the first place.
Jason?
Yeah, I mean, he's like, face it, not guilty, right? Like, and he knew that from the beginning. But the goal of the Trump administration, the goal of authoritarians, the goal of what he said when he came into office, I'll be a dictator on day one or on day 100 something, is it's not about the Ross Barakas. It's not about the members of Congress. It's about the next people down the line who are going to be afraid to even engage in those kinds of inspections because they don't want to have to go through this kind of hassle. That's what the goal is here.
Exactly. And that's why they are, in their view, allegedly, winning by losing. You lose the case, but you might trigger the effects you said. It's a serious news night. So Emily and I are, keeping it together.
Trying.
But I think you briefly fitted in a Biggie reference, Jason.
I did, but it's absolutely applicable to these circumstances.
Respect.
And anything in the New York, Jersey area, we got to make sure we do.
Face it, not guilty. That's how I stay filthy.
Exactly.
Thank you. You know what, Emily? I don't want to talk about you in front of you, Jason. It's like, when people do that at dinner, except now we're on national television. Well, I'm going to do it, okay? he's very shrewd with it. I mean, he just puts it in there. You almost don't hear it.
Yeah, I think he'll take the compliment on national news. Jason can handle it.
Jason can handle it. And we can handle.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. We can handle a moment of absurdity amidst a much more serious environment, especially for all the people affected in this story, which we've been covering. So I appreciate all of everyone's erudition on the panel. Jason and Emily, thank you. We have a lot coming up. James Carville is here. You see him, you know him. We got the gift, the graft, and the political complete attack on separation of powers. How would James recommend you deal with that? We'll find out next.
If they can go after someone like Congresswoman McIver, somebody who serves in an official office, who's doing her official duties, they are coming for you. It's complete political theater.
Warning from a top Democrat tonight, and now we are joined by James Carville, a longtime Democratic strategist. Welcome. Do you see a line crossed here, and what is the way for your party to deal with it?
Well, so many lines have been crossed, so many lines have been erased. I don't even know if there are any lines left. For me, and this is my personal opinion, I think they went after her, and I think her race has something to do with it. I'll just flat out say that.
You're of the view, and it's my job. I'll let you finish. It's my job, James. Yeah, no, but it's my job to ask you to substantiate it. But you're of the view. You're of the view. Well, I'll let you finish. You're of the view that you're asserting that the Trump administration or DOJ is targeting her racially. Why do you assert that?
Because that's what they're about, and they're trying to show it's us against them. They talk about the blood of America and the poisoning of blood, and they talk about this kind of stuff. Again, let me be very clear. I don't have any proof, but if you ask me, do I think that's what happened? Yes, I think that's what happened. I think if it was a white congressperson, they would not have arrested her. I'll just flat out say that, and I'm
and that's a big claim, and they would,
and that's it.
And I think many people there have and would continue to fight you on that. The president said this is about going after, quote, woke activities, and it's going to stop. Do you see that as also this sort of coded way to present her?
Look, they're trying to do everything they can to draw attention to immigration because the global economy is terrible. The rates on a 10-year bond are going up. It's soft everywhere. Companies are warning of lower earnings. And all of this is happening. He's not done anything about any of this. He can't get his bill through Congress. So great. I got a great solution. Let's go out and arrest a black woman. And then that'll solve everything. And that'll have everybody talking about this. So I don't trust them at all. I think they'll use anything. I think they're in the midst of a massive failure. They're in the midst of a massive failure on Bill, greatest, whatever he calls that, BBB bill. The economy is going terribly. He's passed 5 things since the Congress started. It's nothing. And all of a sudden, when you got nothing to go on, hey, let's get the black person and we can change the conversation. That's what I really, really believe.
And what do you see in the way that the big case that they rolled out against the mayor, as I showed tonight, fell apart, that they dropped it because it's this dual thing. And I'm curious what you think politically, which is part of all this, the Democrats should do. You say you don't overreact, don't talk too much. But on the other hand, pushing back has worked because the case is now gone.
Well, push back and she's going to raise $4 million in legal fees and is going to have lawyers like you wouldn't believe because people like myself are totally outraged by this. But again, so they have to drop the case against the mayor because they don't have a case. So they would, gee, we can't do that and back off. Let's just arrest somebody else. Then 3 weeks later, they're going to drop the case against her and try to arrest him. And they'll talk about taking over Greenland, or they'll talk about the Panama Canal or Canada or some other distraction that they have. And we're in the midst of one of the great failure administration in the first 4 months that we've seen in American history. And that's just what it is. And they're doing everything they can to deflect our attention from the massive failures that they're responsible for. And I feel sorry for the congressperson. She'll be fine. She'll have nothing but top-rate legal talent. She did nothing wrong. She's entitled to an opinion. She's a member of Congress. When you start arresting members of Congress, you get into some pretty serious territory there. So I'm not very worried about her future. But I just think they're going to continue to do this, and they continue to put that bait out there, and we're just going to continue to hit at it.
Yeah. Yeah, the ACLU said today that it was clearly, in their view, a political persecution, that it was autocratic. And people have to understand what's happening out there. I mean, the mayor's case fell apart. So apparently, as I said,
one,
go ahead.
One falls apart, one falls apart, you try to make up another one. And when this one falls apart, they're going to try to make up another one.
Yeah. But apparently, as I said, even according to Trump, to Trump DOJ, it wasn't trespassing. You can take their word for it because they dropped it. When you talk about the actual results of this administration, I want to turn you to Elon Musk, who was very big and bold and out there in the beginning. There was a lot of pushback. It's funny. Someone who has public companies can be richer than anyone, but they still have pressure points. He was out today doing a high-profile interview, not about government cuts, not about MAGA, but about Tesla and trying to pitch his company and get it back on good footing. And then he's kind of telegraphing, grain of salt if you don't believe him, that he doesn't want to be as deeply in this MAGA stuff right now. Take a listen.
I think in terms of political spending, I'm going to do a lot less in the future.
And why is that?
I think I've done enough.
Is it because of blowback?
Well, if I see a reason to do political spending in the future, I will do it. I do not currently see a reason.
Well, all right. It reminds me of a story of my childhood. I had a hairpin and was sticking it in an electrical socket. And my mother said, son, don't do that. And my uncle said, let him do it, and he won't do it again. You know what? I did it, and I didn't do it again. He got involved in politics. He stuck that hairpin in that electric socket. And he's going back to electric motors. He's not going back to politics, I can tell you that. I mean, he spent God knows what he spent. Wisconsin got beat by 10 points. His poll numbers are, I don't know how you describe how low they are. And, finally his board and his investors said, hey, man, get the hell out of there. And I think he's glad to get out.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating because there was a period where it almost seemed like unchecked. All the talk of him as a cabinet overlord or even co-president. But that might have been overblown. It had a lot of impact. I'm not minimizing that. But boy, the idea that he's just ruling, he took a brand name that took years to build and had I would argue, prior to the politics, Tesla had a pretty good reputation and a pretty broad one on the green side of things. And very quickly, he toxified it. He can afford the losses, you could say, but he did toxify it. I want to show you something that I'm going to ask you about. The New York Times has this inside story of Trump's search for a new Air Force One. I guess insight on what his mind is about. Is he thinking about you and lowering your prices, or is he thinking about his plane? It involved weeks of, quote, secret coordination between Washington and Doha. His envoy got in touch with the Qataris to ask about the plane. This is concerning or suspicious if it's the U.S. government courting or seeking this gift. And so I want to ask you, James, to think about what does that mean and why did this story have so many legs, and is it one that bears staying on? So I want you to stay with me. Give me your answer when we come back. More James Carville right after this. New York Times reporting the lavish plane you see on your screen was initially proposed as a gift from the U.S. side from Qatar. James Carville back with us. Your breakdown.
Oh, it's so much worse than that. First of all, they couldn't sell the plane. They were trying to sell it. So then they're going to give it to us, a $4 million airplane, and take $1 billion to refit because, they might have had a wire or a bug in there. But it's even worse than that. After his term, it reverts to the library, which would hold it forever. That means him and all of his heirs would have tax-free use of a 747 for their entire lives because it would be controlled by the library, which has a tax exemption. It's so bad. It's unbelievable. And by the way, unlike most people, I've been on Air Force One. It's a pretty good plane. Let me tell you, it's not bad. You would be lucky to fly them.
You know what you're doing?
We have a new one on order that's going to be delivered, I think,
James,
by 2027.
They call that a flex. when you can brag that you've been on Air Force One.
Well, there you go. Okay, so I bragged out, but I can report dutifully to your viewers that I've been on there, and it's some pretty good digs on there. I got to tell you, it's not bad.
And you think back, we played the other day the Lincoln bedroom supposed outrage that people had interacted, with then President Clinton. This puts it all to shame. If they got the gift, it would be 100 times any gift ever taken in the modern era by a president. And most legal scholars say that Congress would still have to approve it because it's clearly a gift from a king. Is this a vulnerability, and does it show a misplaced priorities when people are worried about egg prices?
Well, I mean, look, I think it's a vulnerability. I mean, you could tell it was vulnerability by the pushback from all of the Republicans. This is not going to happen. But, I mean, he went to a lot of trouble to do this. There were a lot of negotiations. There were a lot of people associated with the United States government that were trying to arrange this to please him. And they were just giving him, understand that, a $400 million airplane. And then he was going to have it, his children going to have it, his grandchildren, to God knows what not. They would keep this. I mean, it was so staggering. You even with him, you just become immune to like a second look, and you go, oh my God. And then as you think about it more, it's even worse. And by the way, in defense of President Clinton, they live in the White House. That's their house. That's the deal. When you get elected, you live there.
Yeah.
You want to invite overnight guests. You're not. That's your house. You can do what you want with it.
I heard a rumor they invited you on Air Force One, James.
I've been, I'm dropping names here and being an important guy, but
we love it.
Reporting back, it's a pretty nice thing.
You're in your 80s, right? I think you're allowed to drop some names after all the work you've done. That's my personal view. But we'll turn here to the Democrats. We talked a lot about all the other news, and Republicans run the government, so they're under more scrutiny. But it is interesting. The Democrats are clearly still finding their way. And when you ask voters here in a new poll, who's the real face of the party? These are some of the names you see. Interesting that Harris comes in so low right now. Sanders' number used to be higher, as you know. He's got a base, but he's up there in the age. AOC's very young, also more famous in the internet side of things. I know this doesn't mean much. I'm sure one part of your answer is, hey, you got an off election year poll. It's kind of asking a vague question. But what do you glean from this, especially with Harris being lower, which means perhaps there's a search really for brand new people?
So first of all, we were lucky because I saw the poll and I looked at it. All right. It is utterly useless. First of all,
I knew this was going to happen.
The poll is of everybody. Okay. So all the Republicans, all you see is AOC on Fox. So first of all, that's
like a reverse. I get it.
That's the general public's view. That's not the Democratic view. It means nothing. And all I hear is about bad Democratic poll numbers. And every time I pick up the paper, Democrats are winning another election. All right. And I don't mean to be sarcastic here, but I count votes more than I count polls. And does anyone really think we're not going to win Virginia and win it by a lot? Because I don't. And I'm booking bets.
Well, let me push back.
Okay.
Let me push back slightly. You're making a very valid point on the, you look at the crosstabs. It's not proportionate to people involved in the Democratic Party because you have all the opponents and haters in there. And as you say, they're naming the person they've been programmed to. Fair point. But James, if you don't see Chuck Schumer and Jeffries on there, and you don't see some of the other big names like Harris, it does suggest some confusion in the general public about who's really leading the party right now, no?
There's no leader in the party. Okay, and the party doesn't have a message. Let's get over that right now. Now, we can fight back. We've got a lot of fighting back to do on the legislation is coming. We got our elections coming up. But the way that the party has a leader is a presidential nominee. We're not going to have one until 2028. But boy, have we got some talent out there. And I don't have a very favorable opinion of the Democratic Party, and I have no idea who the leader of the party is, and they're not even disturbed because Democrats are going to pick their own leader. It's not going to be picked by the press. It's not going to be picked by polls. It's going to be it's going to be picked by Democratic voters, and that'll have to come in due time. But I don't think the party is in near as bad shape as being portrayed to be. Look, we lost an election. I don't like the party. I don't blame the party reputation for being low, but I think that if AOC wants to run for president, she gets the nominee, and God bless you. You are the leader of the Democratic Party. Whoever gets that nomination is going to be it. And that's all I'm waiting for.
Here we backed into some intra-party news. You heard it here first. James Carville, once a critic of the AOC podcast landscape, now says, if you win, you win, and you got his support.
So you win. Look, that's my attitude. You win the election, you got it.
I'm putting it on the paper there. James Carville, across 2 blocks and many topics. Good to see you, sir. Our thanks to James. We'll be right back. The Trump trade war is grinding on, even as he's backtracked partly, and it's not always in the headlines. Walmart, though, reminded everyone this summer that Trump tariffs are expensive and you will be paying for part of them. Trump has promised all kinds of deals were forthcoming. In fact, we heard that for weeks. Give it a little more time. In fact, we've had supporters of the tariff policy to some degree on this program, and many of them said, give it time. Guess what's going to happen? Now a Trump advisor is being grilled on the low results.
In nearly 2 months, and you've had one deal. So what is the holdup with all the other countries?
There's been a whole bunch of deals, but
sorry, with what country?
Well, I mean, so you don't think that the deal with China counts as a deal, or the deal with the UK? We've got like an agreement in principle with India. You could talk to Jameson Greer, Scott Bessent, Howard Luck. Everybody has seen awesome deals that are on the table.
Look, we've gone from let's make a deal to let's call things that aren't deals, deals, while the prices keep going up. We'll be right back. That does it for us.